Well, that's been a week. You know, I'm tempted to ask, have you followed through on the experiments? Yeah, you remember them. Offer her 2 massages a week. She can say no. And have her speak to you and listen until she's finished. Do you know, it's very important in my mind, and I've kind of learnt this over the years, that I seldom learn anything from just watching stuff or reading stuff. You know, all the best learning, all the insights I've ever had have been when I have taken action. You know, when I've said to myself, I need to do something. When I have that feeling rising up in me that action is what's required here. When I can see myself beginning to move into action, I'm far more likely to take action. So I'm hoping you've done the exercises. I'm assuming you have, and you found the written material interesting. Those emails were designed to give you more information and to point you towards this module, this video today. So welcome back today. Now, I've already hinted about the influence that an evolutionary biological way of seeing the human race impacts my work. I guess it makes logical sense to many of you that given that we are animals, and that given we've been evolving as a species of animals for many millions of years. You know, some people say we've been on 2 legs for about, I don't know, just under 200,000 years, but we've been a species of mammal for many millions of years before that. Now, this may surprise some of you, but when it comes to an evolutionary adaption, a biological adaption in a species, it takes 5,000 generations for that adaption to take effect in the animal. That's 70 million years. That's amazing, isn't it? That amazes me. It amazes me, I think, because I am a caveman living in the fast lane. I have a body that, at a deeply unconscious level, is responding to instinctive forces that are at work. Now, that in a way, that kind of has to be true. You know, when we were hunter-gatherers, you know, long before we had the ability to think in words and therefore create stories, we were responding as the male of the species in an intuitive, instinctive way. We didn't have to think about jumping to a conclusion about risks in our environment. You know, if we were out hunting and gathering, let's assume we were as the male of the species, because we seem to have evolved different mechanisms inside our biological structure. We seem to have evolved different perceptual filters. We seem to have evolved more muscle mass and, on average, more strength. Let's assume we were hunter-gathering, and we're out hunter-gathering and we see a tiger print. To stop and think, is that an Indian or a Bengal tiger? I don't know, that's probably not even right ethologically, but you know what I mean. If we were to stop and ponder that, we would be toast. We would not be here. We come from a long line of human male primates who have jumped to conclusions about risk, about danger. It's why we're here. That I am the pinnacle of masculine evolutionary development. Hey, I know there are better specimens, but I am from that generation, millions of years old generation, who have survived until now. Wow. You know, if ever I consider that I'm not successful or I'm a failure, I do reflect, I do change the time frame and give the time frame millions of years and realize that I am perfectly adapted as a human being. Oh, things have moved on in terms of our culture, in terms of how we respond in a modern culture. We have a Stone Age body in the fast lane, living in the fast lane. And our body is going to adapt to that over the years ahead. When you think about it in that way, it's easy to come to the conclusion that women are just the same. When I say just the same, I mean that their evolutionary adaptive history has been evolving over millions and millions and millions and millions of years, and that your partner comes from a long line of effectively birthing women. It kind of has to be true, because if it wasn't true, we wouldn't be here. Given all that, what are some of the key things that you knowing them about evolutionary biology will prepare you to be present in the birth room, to be truly present? Do you remember that kind of presence I was speaking about? It's not that kind of presence that's based on proximity. You know, I do conferences to all female groups and mixed groups, and I often say, do you know when he is in the room, maybe even talking to you, but he's not present? And there's always knowing giggles and knowing laughs, and there's always exchanged glances, because women have an experience of that. They know when we're not present, and we have a sense of it too. So we're going to expound on that as the weeks go through, but today I want you to get a grasp. I want you to be able to think through some of these evolutionary adaptations over the many millions of years that will inform your presence. Here we go. Well, the part of the brain responsible for the birthing process is the amygdala and the limbic system. The first thing to note about the amygdala and the limbic system is it is something we share with our mammalian species generally. It's been in formation for many millions of years. It works perfectly. It kind of has to work perfectly for the same reasons I was saying about birth working perfectly. It has to be instinctive. It doesn't necessarily respond to being spoken to. It's not under the control of the conscious mind, the thinking mind. It does its stuff. Now, when you think about that, that's perfect, because it working in its automatic way, in its instinctive animalistic way, means that we have survived. Its primary focus is on survival, and it has worked for millions of years to keep us safe. That's the amygdala. It's the part of the brain that is responsible for the 4 Fs. You know what the 4 Fs are, right? Fight, flight, freeze, and reproduction. Now that's the amygdala. Many, many millions of years old. That's the limbic system. Responsible for the 4 Fs. Responsible for making sure that we've survived as a species for these many, many millions of years that we have done. In a woman, the amygdala system and the limbic system is crucial when it comes to birth. To be frank, it's crucial when it comes to her even feeling like she likes you. When she is feeling feelings of connection and love, when she is feeling you being with her and all of that, it's the limbic system and the amygdala that's doing its work. It's creating a hormone in abundance called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a hormone you need to take note of. Oxytocin is the hormone that is responsible for starting the birthing process, keeping the birthing process going. It's responsible for the birth of the baby. It's responsible for the birth of the placenta, among with other hormones, but it's the queen of hormones. It's responsible for when she goes on to breastfeed, for letting the milk down. It's a crucial hormone. It's the hormone that when she feels bad, she wants more of it. You know, there's other hormones too, but it's a crucial one. The kind of activities she chooses to do when she feels bad in order to feel better raise oxytocin. It's the hormone that was released in abundance when you massaged her. It was the hormone that was released in abundance when you listened to her. It's a very important hormone, and it's at the behest of the amygdala and the limbic system, and that system is ancient. Now, there's another structure in the brain called the forebrain. Now, the forebrain, according to evolutionary biologists and neurophysiologists, began to form around about 200,000 years ago. And again, there's differences of opinion, but between 25 and 15,000 years ago, that forebrain developed the ability for us to start to speak. We didn't have language to frame our experience. We weren't able to tell ourselves a story about what was going on in our lives and therefore create a feeling experience. Before we had language, we used to respond instinctively to threats, real threats. What do I mean by real threats? Well, someone was trying to kill us. We weren't getting any food. The amygdala did its stuff in order to motivate us to get away, in order to stimulate us to get away. You know, like birds flying south, they do that for instinctive reasons, not to get a suntan, right? So before we had the neocortex, which is very young in evolutionary terms, is barely the blink of an eye, we responded instinctively. Since we have the neocortex, we're able to think ourselves to a certain extent into an amygdala response. In the past, it would have been a real threat. Now we can just imagine a threat and start to get that response. You know, I heard someone tell a story. He was talking about being in a room and someone jumped into the room with a balaclava and a Kalashnikov. And in that moment, there was a very, very real threat. He responded with his amygdala. Shortly afterwards, the guy pulled off his hat. The threat was relieved and the amygdala responded appropriately. We can now, because we have the ability to talk to ourselves and to talk to others and create stories, we can now hallucinate a risk that isn't really there and create an amygdala response. And we all know, don't we, that the rise in stomach ulcers and the rise in stress-related illness, that we're gonna talk more about managing stress in the next video, it's on the rise. And other people would tell you that we're humans because we are now able to think about thinking. So the neocortex is very young. It's the new kid on the block. It can have an influence on the limbic system, I doubt, but the limbic system will carry on doing its work. Now, why is this important when it comes to her giving birth? Imagine this. We were on the plains as hunter-gatherers while she was in the birthing process. Suddenly, she was attacked. It was probably our role to preserve the birthing space, to keep her safe from actual threats of violence and death. Right now it's our role, part of our role, to keep her safe from feelings of stress and fear. Our role has changed. We have the same amygdala responses, but now the behaviors that come out, we're going to design them and craft them in order to keep her safe from feeling fear. Because when we were hunter-gatherers, before we had our forebrain, she was in the birthing process, she was attacked by a real threat. The oxytocin that was awash in her body as she was birthing became interrupted by adrenaline. As she had her fight or flight response while birthing, adrenaline came into her system, and lo and behold, the oxytocin in her body went down and the birthing process began to go off. Why? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Her body, the female body, had adapted this mechanism so that when she was under threat, the birthing process would diminish and go down so that she could run away. Perfect. It works perfectly. Now, if we add something else to this discussion, quite a famous obstetrician called Michel Odon has said this, and he says, orgasm and birth are one event separated by time. What does he mean? Well, the hormones responsible for her being able to release herself into orgasm are the same family of hormones that are responsible for the birthing process going along well and completing well. The same family of hormones. Orgasm, birth, one event separated by time. You know, I've had men in all male groups say to me, oh, 9 months, that fits into our sexual history. You know, anyway, I always say, well, you know, you don't give her an orgasm, right? You know that she gets to release herself into an orgasm. You might create an environment that makes it more likely that she'll release herself into orgasm. That leads me on to the next thing I'd like you to stop and think about. Now, when it comes to heterosexual male and female dance of sex, there are times when my girlfriend might want me to pull her hair. But if I get it wrong, that's it. The supply of oxytocin is turned off and she's not in the mood, right? But in the main, there are some general environmental factors that influence whether she will be more likely to release herself into orgasm. You know, I want you to stop now and think, maybe even pause the video. What are some of those factors? Anything like the groups that I've been in, some common themes come out. Things like privacy, things like warmth, things like feelings of trust, things like candles, things like intimacy. One bloke said, loving words that are few. Those are common themes that come out when men talk about observing the kinds of environment that are more likely for her to release herself into orgasm. You know, in one group, I had a group full of barristers and lawyers and all kinds of folk. There was a whole group of blokes from thoroughly working class background, like me, working class and proud. And it always amazes me that in those kind of mixed social groups, the themes are so common. One guy pipes up and he says, oh, talking about environment, he says, oh, she likes me to take her in boots. And we all stopped and looked at each other. And I said to him, oh my goodness, you must have been banned from loads of chemists. And he said, oh, no, she likes me to wear Dr. Martin boots, as though that kind of explained it. You know what I mean? But there are these general factors that have an impact upon a woman releasing herself into orgasm, and therefore are having an impact upon her birth. This kind of understanding about the amygdala and the limbic system and the way the forebrain can introduce a factor that will affect the birthing process when it comes to orgasm, that I'm imagining will be becoming obvious to you in your own experience, that certain environments, certain ways of being make it more likely that she will release herself into orgasm. I know that you've already made the next leap. If that has been so for many millions of years, surely it's still so. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been on the labour ward, someone's rang up and she's obviously in the birthing process. The contractions are causing her to breathe heavily. She's calm at home. She's been in her own environment. She's been in an environment that's familiar to her. And she makes her way to the hospital, and suddenly the environmental factors shift and change. Bright lights, people that she doesn't know asking her to take her knickers off, strange smells. And over the 20 plus years I've been a midwife, I've noticed that the birthing process seems to quieten down as she arrives into the hospital. Now, it soon starts again as you do the things in hospital that you've planned ahead of time to do. As she starts feeling comfort in the hospital, it starts again. You know, that's a given. But when a woman is in the birthing process at various stages, she almost seems to lose her mind. Her forebrain quietens down, and the limbic system kind of takes over. And there's going to be a video clip in the notes just talking about the physiology of orgasm in women. Now, what I want you to do, one of your exercises this week, is I want you to stop and think about the material you've heard so far. And I would like you to write a plan, if you like, based on your understandings that the environment will affect how your partner responds to birth. Just write a list of some environmental factors that may be important to her while she's birthing. Those factors that might influence her being able to relax and lose her mind. That's exercise 1. Now, I just want to go back to the first exercise. When I say you write a list and a plan, that's not for sharing with her. When it comes to having a conversation with her about how you're both thinking the birth should go, I'd like you to introduce the idea of writing a story, if you like, or of thinking ahead and writing a narrative for how you would prefer the birth to go. You see, the birthing process doesn't yield to planning. You can't plan it into going the way you want it to do. It's an unfolding narrative that ebbs and flows. And having an idea of how you would prefer that narrative to go is a good exercise. Exercise 2, okay, for those of you that choose to do it, for those of you that feel that it's relevant to you. If your partner likes music, I'd like you to think about putting together a playlist of slow dance music. You know, those of us that of my era, that's it's the kind of music that you'd smooch to at the end of a disco. That's right, at the end of the disco. So put together a playlist, and I want you to suggest once this week, having put the playlist together of music that you think she might like to just dance to, I want you to suggest, maybe after one of the massages that you've offered her or before, that you just dance to this slow music playlist. Next video will explain more about how our mind and body is linked, more about how communication is the product of a vastly unconscious process. And this exercise, the slow dance playlist exercise, will begin to make more sense to you. Now, for some of you, music isn't the thing that you know she'll respond to. Well, that's fine. But you have 2 exercises.